Chapter 9. The Final Winter. You've now been living in the Viking Age for over 2 years. 2 years of cold, hunger, violence, and survival. 2 years of watching people die, participating in raids, and slowly becoming the thing you once would have found monstrous. This winter feels different, harsher. The first snows come early, and they don't stop. By mid-November, the settlement is buried under drifts higher than a man's head. The fjord freezes solid for the first time in memory. This isn't just cold. This is a killer winter, and everyone knows it. Food stores that seemed adequate in autumn are suddenly worrying. The livestock is dying despite best efforts to keep them warm and fed. And the hunting, which usually supplements winter supplies, is impossible in these conditions. Rationing begins early. Each person's daily food allocation is reduced. First by a little, then by more as it becomes clear how long this winter might last. You're always hungry now. Not the temporary hunger before a meal, but the deep, gnawing hunger of chronic malnutrition. Your body is consuming itself, burning muscle for energy. Everyone is getting thinner, weaker. Children suffer most. Their small bodies can't handle prolonged starvation. You watch as they become listless, stop playing, just sit by the fire with hollow eyes. A child dies in January. Then another. Then 2 more. They're dying of what's euphemistically called winter sickness. But you know it's starvation complicated by disease. The parents bury their children in graves hacked from frozen earth with incredible effort. There are no elaborate ceremonies. Everyone is too weak, too cold, too focused on their own survival. By February, the settlement is in crisis. People are eating things they wouldn't normally consider food. Leather, boiled to soften it, provides minimal calories. Bark from trees, ground into powder, and mixed with what little flour remains. Even sawdust is added to bread to make it stretch further. The thralls fare worst. They're already on reduced rations in good times. Now they're truly starving. You watch as they waste away. Their bodies skeletal, their movements slow and painful. One thrall too weak to work is simply expelled from the longhouse, cast out into the snow to die. It's pragmatic, cruel, and necessary in the minds of the Vikings. Why waste food on someone who can't contribute? But free people are dying too. The old go first, then the very young, then anyone who was already weak or sick. The longhouse, once crowded, has empty spaces now. Sleeping platforms that held families are vacant. The silence where there used to be conversation is unnerving. People are making terrible decisions. A man kills his neighbor's dog and eats it. This normally would result in severe punishment, but everyone is too weak and desperate to care much. Rumors start that someone has resorted to eating human flesh, digging up recently buried bodies for food. No one can prove it, but the rumors persist, adding psychological horror to the physical misery. The Jarl tries to maintain order, but he's starving too. His authority is based partly on his ability to provide for his people, and he's failing. You can see the weight of this bearing down on him. He makes a desperate decision. In March, despite the weather still being atrocious, he announces that a party will attempt to reach a neighboring settlement to trade for food. It's a suicide mission. The journey is perhaps 3 days in good weather. In these conditions, with snow still falling and temperatures well below freezing, it could take a week or more, and the neighboring settlement might not have food to spare anyway. But staying means certain death for more people. So the risk must be taken. 5 men volunteer, including Olaf, your longtime companion and guide to this nightmare world. They prepare as best they can. Multiple layers of clothing, snowshoes made from wood and leather, what little food can be spared, and weapons in case they encounter anything. You watch them leave at dawn, disappearing into the swirling white. You wonder if you'll ever see any of them again. Days pass. A week, 2 weeks. No one returns. The settlement assumes they're dead. Frozen somewhere between here and there, their bodies to be discovered in spring. Or maybe they made it to the other settlement, but decided to stay there rather than attempt the return journey. Either way, they're gone. The settlement continues its slow collapse. More people die. The living are too weak to maintain the longhouse properly. The fire is kept going, but just barely. Other maintenance is abandoned. A section of the roof collapses under the weight of snow. It's not repaired because no one has the strength. That section of the longhouse is simply abandoned, sealed off, the space surrendered to the cold. You're so weak yourself that getting up requires enormous effort. You spend most of your time lying on your sleeping platform, conserving energy, trying to stay warm. Conversations have mostly stopped. Everyone is too tired to talk. The longhouse is eerily quiet. except for coughing and the occasional moan of pain. Then, in late March, a miracle, or what passes for one in this frozen hell, the relief party returns. Only 3 of the 5 men, but they're alive, and they bring food. Not much. The neighbouring settlement was struggling too, and could only spare a little. But it's enough. Dried fish, some grain, a bit of preserved meat. It might buy the settlement another few weeks. Olaf is among the survivors. He's lost probably 40 pounds, his face gaunt, his movements slow, but he's alive. That night, around the fire, he tells the story of their journey. How they nearly died multiple times. How one man did die, falling through ice on a frozen stream, and unable to climb out before hypothermia took him. How another man turned back on the second day, and they never saw him again. But they made it. They traded silver and a valuable sword for the food. And they came back. It's the kind of story that will be told for generations, assuming the settlement survives. The food is rationed carefully. Everyone gets a tiny bit more to eat. It's not enough to end the hunger, but it's enough to delay death a little longer. And finally, mercifully, spring begins to arrive. The days get longer. The temperature rises above freezing occasionally. The snow starts to melt. The settlement has survived. Barely. A count is taken of who made it through the winter. The population is down by 30%. 30%. Nearly 1 in 3 people dead, mostly children and elderly, but also some adults who simply couldn't endure the privation. Their bodies are discovered as the snow melts, frozen in the places they died, some inside buildings, others who wandered outside and never returned. Mass graves are dug. Bodies are buried with minimal ceremony. There are too many dead and too few living with the strength to properly honor them. This is what a truly bad winter does to a Viking settlement. It's apocalyptic. The margin between survival and extinction is razor thin. As spring truly arrives and the ice breaks up on the fjord, the survivors face a new reality. The settlement is diminished. There aren't enough hands to do all the work that needs doing. The fields need planting, but there aren't enough people to plant them properly. The Jarl makes decisions about the future. Some outlying farms are abandoned. Their occupants, those who survived, brought into the main settlement to consolidate resources. Thralls, now more valuable than ever because there are so few people, see their treatment improve slightly. Dead thralls can't work, so keeping them fed enough to function becomes a priority, and plans are made for extensive raiding this season. The settlement desperately needs to recoup its losses. More wealth, more food, more thralls to replace those who died. The young men who survived the winter are hardened now. They've looked death in the face for months. Going on raids seems less terrifying when you've already survived the worst winter in living memory. You look around at the survivors and realize you're one of them. You made it. You survived a Viking winter that killed 1/3 of the population. You're thinner, weaker, probably have some permanent health effects from months of near starvation. But you're alive, and you realize something else. This isn't just a bad year. This is climate change in action. The medieval warm period is ending. Temperatures are dropping across the North Atlantic. Winters are getting worse. This is the beginning of the end for the Viking Age, though no one knows it yet. The climate that allowed Norse expansion, that made farming viable in Greenland and Iceland, that enabled long-distance voyages, is changing. Over the next century, it will become colder, harder. The Greenland colonies will fail. Iceland will struggle. Even Norway will find it increasingly difficult to support its population. The Vikings will have to adapt or die. And eventually, they'll be absorbed into Christian kingdoms, their old ways abandoned, their culture transformed. But that's the future. Right now, in this moment, the settlement celebrates survival. The worst is over. Spring is here. There's a blot, a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the gods who supposedly carried the settlement through the winter. A sheep is killed, its blood sprinkled on the survivors. There's even a small feast, modest by normal standards but feeling like a banquet after months of starvation. People are smiling again, talking, making plans. The human capacity to bounce back, to keep going despite horrific circumstances, is on full display. And you? You're making plans too. Plans to survive another year in this brutal time and place. Because that's all you can do. Survive, endure, keep going. The ships are being prepared for the raiding season. Weapons are being readied. Young warriors are training, eager to prove themselves and earn wealth. And you, hardened now by 2 years of Viking life, will join them. Not because you want to, but because it's what's expected, what's necessary. You've become what you needed to become to survive. A Viking. Epilogue. The truth behind the legend. As you stand on the beach watching the longship being prepared for another season of raiding, you reflect on everything you've experienced. 2 years in the Viking Age. 2 years that have fundamentally changed you. The Vikings you've lived with aren't the noble warriors of legend. They're not the romanticized heroes of television shows and movies. They're people, flawed and complex, living in brutal circumstances that shape them in brutal ways. They're capable of incredible bravery and incredible cruelty. Often in the same breath, they can show deep loyalty to family and friends, while treating outsiders with shocking callousness. They create beautiful art and poetry, while also creating efficient systems of slavery and violence. This complexity is what's been lost in most modern depictions of Vikings. They're either idealized as noble savages, or demonized as mindless barbarians. The truth, as always, is more complicated. Yes, Vikings were raiders and slavers. They committed acts that by any modern standard would be considered war crimes. They built a society on violence and the exploitation of the weak, but they were also skilled craftspeople, navigators, poets and lawmakers. They created sophisticated trading networks, established settlements across vast distances, and developed a legal system that, while harsh, was relatively fair for its time, if you were a free man at least. They gave women more rights than most contemporary societies, though those rights were still severely limited. They valued honor and reputation, though their definition of honor often involved violence. They believed deeply in their gods and fate, which gave them a philosophical framework for understanding a chaotic world, and they were products of their environment. The harsh climate of Scandinavia, the limited farmland, the difficulty of survival, all created a society that valued strength, pragmatism, and the ability to take resources from others. Were they evil? By modern standards, many of their actions certainly were, but they didn't see themselves that way. They were doing what they believed was necessary and right according to their values. Does that excuse the violence, the slavery, the brutality? No, but it helps explain it. The Viking Age lasted roughly from 793 to 1066 AD, about 270 years of expansion, raiding, trading, and settlement. During that time, Vikings fundamentally changed European history. They established kingdoms in England, Ireland, and France. Normandy, they settled Iceland and Greenland, and briefly North America. They traded as far east as Constantinople and Baghdad. They sold slaves, amber, and furs in exchange for silver, silk, and spices. Their impact was enormous. The English language is full of Old Norse words. Many English towns have Norse names. The very concept of democracy owes something to the Viking thing assemblies. But the Viking Age ended, not with a dramatic defeat, but with gradual assimilation. Vikings converted to Christianity, adopted European feudal structures, and eventually became indistinguishable from other European peoples. The last traditionally Viking raid was probably in 1066. The same year as the Norman conquest of England, the Normans themselves being descendants of Vikings who'd settled in France. After that, Scandinavians continued to exist, obviously. But they were no longer Vikings in the cultural sense. They were Christians. They were kingdom dwellers. They followed different values. So what killed the Viking Age? Multiple factors. Christianity provided a competing value system that eventually won out. Climate change made the Norse lifestyle harder to sustain. European kingdoms got better at defense, making raids less profitable and more dangerous. Trade became more lucrative than raiding, and internal development of Scandinavian kingdoms meant that energy formerly directed outward was turned inward to state building. But perhaps most importantly, the Viking lifestyle was ultimately unsustainable. A society built on raiding and slavery needs constant expansion, constant new victims. When you run out of easy targets, the system collapses, and they did run out of targets. Europe learned to defend itself. The easy wealth dried up, and the Vikings had to adapt. Those who adapted became Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Icelanders, integrated into the broader European world. Those who didn't disappeared into history. Today, the Viking Age is remembered through archaeology, the sagas written down centuries after the fact, and physical evidence, ships, weapons, settlements, graves. And what that evidence shows is that life in the Viking Age was hard, much harder than modern romanticized versions suggest. Most Vikings were farmers, not warriors. Most never went on raids. Most lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Most died young, from disease or malnutrition or accidents. The warriors, the raiders, the explorers, they were a minority. An important minority that shaped history, but still a minority. And even for those warriors, life wasn't glorious. It was cold, hungry, painful, and short. The lucky ones died quickly in battle. The unlucky ones died slowly from infected wounds, or starvation, or in their beds as broken old men at 40. The slaves, who made up perhaps a third of the population, had it even worse. Theirs was a life of unrelenting toil and degradation with no hope of improvement. This is the true Viking Age. Not a time of heroes and adventure, but a time of survival, brutality, and the grinding reality of medieval life at its harshest. So why do we romanticize it? Why are we fascinated by Vikings? Perhaps because there's something compelling about their fatalism, their acceptance of harsh realities, their refusal to pretend life was anything other than hard and short. Perhaps because their value system, as alien as it is, has an internal logic. Reputation matters because it's all you leave behind. Courage matters because life is dangerous. Strength matters because the weak don't survive. Or perhaps we just like the aesthetics, the ships, the weapons, the mythology. It's easier to admire Vikings from a safe distance of 1,000 years than it would be to actually live among them. Whatever the reason, the Viking Age continues to fascinate. New archaeology continues to reveal details about how they lived. Popular culture continues to reinvent them for new audiences. But if you really want to understand Vikings, you have to look past the helmets, which didn't have horns, by the way. That's a 19th century invention, and the legends. You have to imagine the cold, the hunger, the constant work, the ever-present violence, the casual cruelty, the deep fatalism. You have to imagine waking up on a wooden platform in a smoky longhouse and knowing that today might be the day you die. From disease, from violence, from an accident, from the cold. You have to imagine living in a world with no safety net, no medicine, no comfort beyond what you can provide yourself. You have to imagine being so hard, so pragmatic that you can watch children die and just move on because there's work to be done, and weakness is fatal. That's the Viking Age. Not glorious, not romantic, just brutal survival in one of history's harshest eras, and you've survived it. For 2 years, you've lived it. You've become it. As the longship is pushed into the water, and you climb aboard for another season of raiding, you carry with you the truth behind the legend. Vikings weren't heroes or villains. They were survivors, doing what they believed necessary in a world that showed no mercy. And sometimes, survival requires becoming the thing others fear. The oars extend, the command to row is given. The ship moves forward into the grey waters of the fjord. Ahead lies another season of violence, of bloodshed, of lives taken and wealth stolen. Behind lies a settlement barely holding on, full of people doing whatever they must to survive another winter. This is the Viking Age. This is how empires are built, and how souls are destroyed. This is the truth that the sagas don't sing about, and now you know it, because you've lived it. Welcome to the real Viking Age. Now close your eyes and be grateful you can wake up in a warm bed, with food in your kitchen, with medicine available when you're sick, with laws that protect the weak, with a society that doesn't require violence to survive. The Vikings don't exist anymore. Their way of life died out centuries ago, and maybe, just maybe, that's for the best. Sweet dreams.